everyone. Today I'm going to discuss with you Ruskin Bond's short story A Face in the Dark. It is a very short story and very simple in terms of plot and language used. The story starts with Mr. Oliver, who is a teacher in a school at Shimla run on by English public school lines. Now, why has this school been called Eton of the East? Right. Eton College is a very prestigious English boarding school for boys, most of them coming from aristocratic and upper class family. The school mentioned in the story maintains the same quality education of an elite school, and boys are supposed to maintain that dress code, wearing blazers, caps and ties. So we can imagine that it too could be afforded by only very wealthy and upper class families of India. Thus, Life magazine compares it to Eton College of England and names it Eton of the East. Now, this school was situated at the outskirts of the hill station of Shimla, and Mr. Oliver is described to be a bachelor, and so to overcome his loneliness, he visits the town during evening. As the story goes, the Shimla Bazaar with its cinemas and restaurants was about 3 miles from the school, and Mr. Oliver, a bachelor, usually strolled into the town in the evening, returning after dark when he would take a shortcut through the pine forest. Now we can understand that not each and everyone or anyone can take a shortcut through the pine forest during the dark hours. He must be a strong-hearted man to cross the forest paths all by himself during darkness. Now, up to this, we have got a very simple and brief description of the school, its surroundings, and about Mr. Oliver and what he does or where he works. To add a supernatural touch and arouse the theme of fear and suspense, Bond uses a very skillful technique. To a very common description of Mr. Oliver and the school, a new touch is given to make it a very complex story. The setting of strong wind, trees making eerie sounds, flickering light of torch, and most importantly, a sobbing or a crying child in the middle of the forest path, and a man of strong heart, not imaginative or nervous, a very strong-hearted man. All these are the aspects which are very strong, which are very important, I would say, for the setting of a horror story. Now, coming back to story, Mr. Oliver, when he sees the boy sitting alone on a rock in the middle of the forest, Mr. Oliver, like most of the teachers are, at first concerned about discipline, means what that boy is doing out here during dark, and boys were not supposed to go out during the dark, not leave the school premises. So he stops and goes to the boy and he sharply asks, "What are you doing out here, boy?" Very sharply. And he moves closer to recognize the miscreant. Now, who is a miscreant? Miscreant is someone who breaks a rule or a law. Now, here the school rule, or who has done some mischief. Here obviously the miscreant is someone who breaks the rule. Now, when he moves closer, he senses that the child is crying, and something was wrong with him. The boy appeared to be crying. His head hung down. When do we hang down our head? When we are very weary, when we are very sad, when we are very disturbed, right? So boy is crying, and his head hung down. He held his face in his hands, the way most of children cry, with their face in their hands. And here the face in hands, why? Because to create a suspense who the miscreant is, because he has come to see the face of the child, but his face is hidden behind his hands. And very importantly, his whole body shook convulsively, very strongly. His whole body is shaking. Now, when does our body shake very convulsively? When we are crying very hard, right? But for that, we all know that while crying, we make noise. Doesn't matter, some make very loud noise, some make less, but there is noise or some sound while crying. But with that voice, something was strange. It was a strange, soundless weeping. And Mr. Oliver felt distinctly uneasy. Now this is the important part. Why? Because this marks the beginning of something strangeness, something striking him with that something is wrong here. And it's not usual, something is unusual with the child. So when he sees that the child is crying, his tone, from being very sharp, it gets a bit softer as Mr. Oliver is concerned about the child. So he asks, "What's the matter?" "Well, what's the matter?" But no response. "What are you crying for?" The boy would not answer or look up. His body continued to be racked with silent sobbing. His body was being like tortured by silent sobbing, shaking convulsively, but silent sobbing. "Come on, boy, you shouldn't be out here at this hour. You could face danger in the forest. Tell me the trouble. Look up." So now this is the invitation of Mr. Oliver to look up, and the boy looked up, and the flickering light of the torch, whose battery is dying, falls on the face of the boy. Now the author says, if you could call it a face. Why? What do we associate with face? Nose, eyes, ears, lips, mouth. Those are the features which define a face. But there was none on the boy's face. It had no eyes, ears, nose, or mouth. It was just a round, smooth head with a school cap on top of it. It is important. With a school cap on top of it. There were no eyes, ears, nose, or mouth. So the boy hasn't been given an individual identity. You can't recognize him by his face as an individual. Face, what does face do? It gives us an entity to know that this is that person, this is that person. But the boy has got none. Whereas he has got a school cap on top of it to describe that he belongs to one of the students where Mr. Oliver teaches. So at least he has been given that identity of a group. And that's where the story should end. Where story should end for most of those faint-hearted, the so-called faint-hearted, those who believe in ghosts. They would have fainted there, right? But for Mr. Oliver, it did not end here. Story will continue. The torch fell from his trembling hand. So the only source of light which he had with himself falls down. He turned and scrambled down the path, running blindly through the trees and calling for help. Now we see that the description which we had got of Mr. Oliver earlier, that he is not a very imaginative man, or he is not a nervous man, or he is not a faint-hearted man, it totally contradicts with now. He is totally horrified, he's totally panicked by the situation that he has faced, and he cannot face his fear now. Now we get to know that in the subconscious mind of each and every person there lies something which we don't know. Maybe out of loneliness or anything, there is something in Mr. Oliver's mind which does not make him a very strong person. He is still weak from inside. So he scrambled down the path, running blindly through the trees and calling for help. Why scramble down the path? Because it's a hilly path. So with all his hand and feet, the way we do when we are panicked, with all our effort we try to run away from that situation or from that place. He was still running towards the school buildings when he saw a lantern swinging in the middle of the path. He had to run down the rough path using his hands and legs. Now in the middle of such horrifying incidents, he sees a lantern swinging, a source of light which he has left behind. And Mr. Oliver, after seeing a lantern and a figure of someone carrying that lantern, obviously gives him some relief. Lantern is the light, the hope. And here with Mr. Oliver, even the readers are relieved that someone or something has come for Mr. Oliver's help in his horrifying experience. Mr. Oliver stumbled up to the watchman, gasping for breath. He has come away running and he's horrified, so obviously gasping for breath. "What is it, Sahib? What is it?" asked the watchman. "Why are you running?" And Sahib, because he's an Anglo-Indian and he's a teacher too, and watchman is kind of subordinate, much subordinate. So he is like, "What is it, Sahib? Has there been an accident? Why are you running?" Because the watchman must have been familiar with Mr. Oliver, and Mr. Oliver is known to be a very strong-hearted man who comes through the pine forests in the dark hour, and he isn't afraid of ghosts, he isn't afraid of darkness. He doesn't believe in supernatural entities like ghosts or anything. So was there an accident? Watchman asks. "Why are you running?" And Mr. Oliver goes like, "I saw something horrible, a boy weeping in the forest." So a boy weeping in the forest cannot be something horrible, but he had no face. It is the strangeness. We always identify with something which we know. If the boy had a face and he was weeping, then Mr. Oliver would have come to help him and he would have brought the boy with him to the school, to the safety. But there, when he couldn't identify the child, when he had no face, there was something strange about him, then Mr. Oliver himself runs away from it, and he is horrified to the extent that he goes like a boy weeping in the forest and he had no face. "No face, Sahib? No eyes, nose, mouth, nothing. Just a smooth, round head." "Do you mean it was like this, Sahib?" asked the watchman and raised the lamp on his own face. The watchman had no eyes, no ears, no features at all. This is the kind of climax. Dang dang. Where if Mr. Oliver had any doubt of the features of the boy, of not having any features of the boy, it is cleared by the watchman. Like this time, he gives another example of an individual, of a face lost in the crowd. The lamp to his own face, the watchman had no eyes, no ears, no features at all, not even an eyebrow. And that's when the wind blew the lamp out. again this darkness. Why this kind of abrupt ending? This kind of ending is called open ending, where reader is left to think what happened next and what would have happened next. Rather means it is left to reader's imagination. What would you imagine? Whether Mr. Oliver fainted there, or was it a dream like we see in most of films, someone watching a horrifying dream and then someone comes and wakes him up, okay, get up, and then he realizes, oh, it was just a dream. Or was it something that they had features but Mr. Oliver couldn't see it because he was so afraid, because he was so frightened? We don't know. It's just upon the readers. So the story can be interpreted in a number of ways. It could be that Mr. Oliver always had a fear of darkness in his subconscious mind, and thus all this was his imagination aroused due to fear of darkness, of unknown. Or it could be because he is an Anglo-Indian, he cannot identify himself with the others who are all same, but he seems to be the other one. This could be the interpretation too, because he is the Anglo-Indian, and now the setting is of the post-independence India. Most of the British people have left India, and thus those who have stayed behind, they feel like someone being the other one, being the different from the others. From the crowd cannot let them mingle in them. Or it also may refer to the psychological disturbance because of his loneliness. He is a bachelor, he stays in the school premises and he has no one. Spending a lot of time alone can be disturbing to anyone. And that is why having friends and family is so important in our life. So cherish your family and friends and enjoy reading this story.